I won't be a moment. Just resizing some windows so I can see what I'm doing. The Earth Curse Saga, Book 1, The Robes of Souls, written by Christopher O'Brien, artwork by Nick Hook. He's absolutely brilliant, and we'll talk more about him and his work in another video. He's actually he's been a ballast for me getting through this, actually. The mortals do not live long enough to appreciate the true extent of their actions, and so only the immortals recognize the true extent of their folly. Nima Vortus, Reaper of the Weary. Prologue, 711 MD. And so, with the parting of the last vestiges of light, the town of Lurk's spell did toll. Its low, dull rings, vast spells of silence between its fading calls, resonated across the large Avarian town. The wooden door of a terraced building that crossed one of the many streets squealed open. An apprentice of the apothecary bade her farewells to her master for the evening and slammed shut the door. Along the same road, the Fell Way, a patrol waltzed down along their evening route. The youngest of them, a lad not yet out of his teens, wearing a heavy chainmail and a scabbard homing a short sword, dashed from one side of the street to the other, holding a flickering torch. Wherever he went, lanterns chained to walls would spark to life and repel the coming of dark night, as the contingent of older peers but boisterously joked amongst themselves. And then another man, a dark form even in the night, strolled towards a tavern. A multitude of crowded conversations and obscene laughter came from its closed windows. The crestfallen Lerskine reached for the door handle, but hesitated a moment. Yet, before long, his moment of thought passed, and he reached for the handle, turning it. The door creaked open. Sounds of mirth assaulted his ears, and unabated light let slip his silhouette. He stepped into the tavern with his arms out wide in greeting, where a chorus of cheers could be heard greeting him back. There was no hesitation shutting the door as there was opening it. Witnessing his entrance from outside, a young woman had watched him disappear from behind the cover of a short wall. She was garbed in a fresh and unsullied dark blue cloak, the hood of which had hid much of her face. What few locks could be seen draping down her face were blonde, and her eyes, in better light, would be a bright blue. Even in the dark, a ceaseless inquisitiveness reigned in those eyes, that so spied upon the tavern's latest guest. She lingered a few moments longer, her darting attentions gathering what details they could, as swiftly as may. The tavern door remained closed. Certain he was not coming back out, she knew she had the time for her nightly expedition, and stood from behind the wall and embarked on her short journey. She hastened past the well where several Kefik beggars quickly turned to her and held out empty cups in plea for alms. Another, a native Avarian, simply gazed ahead, oblivious to all around. All were hungry and had been reduced to shadows of their former selves. But this one looked dangerously thin and had not a hope in his heart, she knew. His clothes were so tattered that any amount of breeze would assault him, his arms thin, his gaunt cheeks highlighting his loss of teeth, and where his chest was exposed, his ribs were frightfully pronounced. At a loss, she could only offer the Druid and the Kefik a sympathetic frown of helplessness and continue to her destination. Past the long rows of wooden houses she went. She glanced up to the one with an open window. It was her own abode. That opened window, her means of getting back in it later, for her father had no doubt locked the door and taken the only key with him. A few moments later, and she was within sight of the graveyard's gate. There were several guards there, restless from an uninspired shift. Their fellow guards were yet to arrive to relieve them, and for this they were cursed and leant lazily on their spears to grant succor to their weary legs. The sound of the tavern not so far away did little to quell their impatience. The young girl, Aurelil, knew none were allowed within the confines of the cold, spiked rails of a graveyard at night. Rather, none were save but the delegates of the arcane enclave. Yet that didn't matter so much, given she knew of a way in that the mischievous urchins would use to infiltrate the graveyard at night. Her passing of the guards drew a few curious glances. Some such glances were more lecherous than others. She hurried on, though, before comments or jeers came her way, but she could at least be glad that their lewd interest in her put off any suspicions of her movements so late around that area. Following the large curvature of the graveyard's perimeter, she arrived by an old tree inside the cemetery. It was here that the roots had served slumbering urchins and midnight lovers quite well. They had uprooted the railings a little and even bent a post which allowed access for Aurelil to squeeze through side on. It was a known compromise, and had been for some time, and yet it was neither repaired nor manned. And so she entered that graveyard and picked her way through the graves of Kefik soldiers that had fought and died in pushing back the raiders of Ulumnor. The gravestones of these soldiers had been cut perfectly, with ornate etchings bordering their slabs. The writings remained pristine, and they were tended to routinely. Beyond these rows of resting grounds were those of the native Avarian druids, who had also died in the fighting alongside their Kefik saviours. These graves were almost as numerous, yet sported no etchings, and were often little more than large stones with crude markings that would identify them to none other than their immediate families. These gravestones were much less tended. Many were even lost to the overgrowth of creeping vegetations and weeds. As she continued her way, her head whipped from one way to the other, ensuring she was still alone. She scanned the ground that any gravestone, rock, or root would not catch her unawares. Aurelil soon traversed beyond the snaking mazes of war graves and began to ascend a very sizable hill littered with more recent graves. The hill itself was artificial and was in fact above a filled-in swamp which was once used for traditional Druidic burials, but now served the graves of Kef and Avarian alike. These graves upon the hill were for the many who had been taken by the plague known locally as the Dominion's Farewell. There were fanciful rumours of the plague's origination on the Gaialoch Peninsula. Kefik occupiers of Lursk declared independence from the Kefik Dominion, whilst the latter was too devastated by widespread plague to do anything about it. It was often suggested that following this independence and the Dominion's inability to retaliate, their old masters simply paid healthy families great sums to send their plagued relatives and servants to Lursk by boat. The story was likely a fiction, but a far-reaching one that many believed, and thus the name the Dominion's Farewell stuck, whilst the facts stuck far less. The plague was not for long in Lursk, however, but it had taken its fill of life there, and Aurelil knew one such victim. She continued ascending and gazed down to the lower graveyard across the labyrinth of small gravestones and memorials to see the crypts and epitaphs of the nobles at the heart. Many of these once had the links to the prestigious arcane enclave. The sight of those things simply made her shudder in discomfort. Often small grotesques leered down from the top of these crypt entrances to disturb would-be grave robbers. It was widely agreed that they were also remnants of long-lost beliefs, that the use of grotesques had somehow survived beyond the age of the first days toward the resting from foul spirits. And though now few feared such a fancied thing as a foul spirit, the ugly grotesque remained. The blazing moon shed little illumination anywhere in the graveyard, but some of those twisted, feral-looking grotesques had eyes of glass that seemed to sparkle at her. Their menacing glares were distant and unseen to her, apart from the white sparkles in their devious eyes. A murder of crows flocked from a tree she strode beneath, startling her immensely and dragging her paranoia from the crypts into a moment of fierce shock. But the fluttering and the cawing of the birds passed, and they flew from her. She paused her tracks and took several deep breaths, hoping to steady her now racing heart. She pulled her cloak about her tightly. It was a cloak her father bought her for her mother's funeral, and was a costly piece of apparel, though rather tidy all the same. Aurelil rarely wore it or had gone to great lengths to preserve it. The hairs of her back were already standing before the chilly air began to sweep up a fierce and spurious breeze. With it came the droplets of a light rain. She could barely feel it at first, but she could hear it tapping on her hood and the shoulders of her cloak. A moment later, and its fall could be heard on the leaves and the stones that paved her way and seeped through her soft cloth to wet her skin and its sharp, cold, trickling excursions down the flesh of her neck and spine. Cursing the timing, she but focused on the path ahead and quickened her pace. But moments later, a fierce downpour was lashing at her, and her beautiful cloak was soaked in seconds. Halfway up the hill of the plague graves, she paused and gazed down to the ground before her. There was a grave yet unspoiled by the elements or vegetation. It was cut well and remained in the good form like many there. Beginning to shudder badly for the wet and cold and the fierce wind now blowing through the graveyard, she slipped her hand outside of her sleeves where they had been keeping warm to pull her cloak tightly around her. It was a futile task of retaining warmth if ever there was one. She dropped to her knees before this grave, and with the rain now battering her, smiling sheepishly at first, the smile grew tense and formed into something sadder. Releasing her hold on her cloak that enveloped her, she wriggled a hand and leant forward as she reached to the stone. "Why, Mum," she muttered amidst a loud crackling of heavy rain. "It's me again. You're Aurelil." A wry smile crossed her face as she glanced around her and up at the sky as if gauging her watery oppressor from on high. Turning back to her mother, she said, "Well, I'd hoped to speak to you for a while, but I'm afraid I'll drown, or this hill will just melt into mud and I'll be going home sliding on my backside. And we don't want that, do we?" She smiled again, but then a tear broke from its cover and was immediately consumed by the fierce rain that beleaguered her pale face. Her head wavered from side to side as if she had an overwhelming urge to say something she did not wish to say, for that was the case. Then, all at once, "Oh, it's him, Mum. Dad, I know he loves me. You know yourself. But since you left, it's just been getting worse. The worst days are when he's not had a nail. We're sat in the same room, a million miles apart, and it's horrible, it's awkward, and it's just a reminder that you're never coming back. Me and him have the rest of our lives together, and I can't be spending it like we're dead to one another. I love you, Mum. You know I love you. You know I miss you. But it's been years now. Not a day goes by I haven't hurt, but I've accepted it, and he can't. There's just this horrible silence, this weight when we're together. The best days are when he's had a few too many and he comes stumbling into my room at daft in the morning and goes blabbering on about how much he loves me, but all he can see in my eyes is you. It's not nice to see him in those states, but at least he's honest. At least he acknowledges I'm alive. Just wish he'd say the same when he's sobered so we can have a proper discussion, you know? But he just acts like it didn't happen, pretends he doesn't remember it's happening still. It's killing him, so he says, and he's right, I can see it." She paused and snaked her exposed hand back into the cloak, which once more she pulled tightly around a small frail frame. "Takes all the shifts he can get now, so we're eating well, you know, and that's good." Her stomach spasmed and her face jerked as sorrow conquered her again so soon. I wish he was taking the shifts because of our well-being, I know it's not. It's so he doesn't have to see me, Mum. The drink's killing him, and he's killing me. "Kedrid!" came an authoritative call from below the hill. It was the voice of a mid-aged woman, a short and agitated call, as if there had been several quieter calls previously that were lost to the loud weather. Aurelil turned to the call like the rest of the world had faded away abruptly. She then quickly clawed forward to her mother's grave and hid behind it, shrinking herself as much as she could. Nothing. Moments later, she dared to peek out from the side of her mother's stone, just enough so one eye could draw a line to the commotion. "Kedrid, stop!" "I'll have no part in it," groaned another voice, presumably a Kedrid. It was that of another mid-aged individual. His voice found an anger and panic in equilibrium. "He is an adept arcanist deserving of his post as Magister, and that I do not deny. But this is beyond him. I know it, you know it. And if he doesn't know it, then, More reason to leave here. We do not learn by trudging around in the knowledge we already have. Aurelil could now just make out the two bickering forms stood to some distance from each other. As the starlight offered only scant illumination, Aurelil could just barely see the two, for each looked blacker than the night. Beside them, a memorial of something lost to the dark rose from the ground, towering above them both. Absurd, Kedrid spat. Of course we do. At least until we can make sense of something new of the old, or identify a pattern, or something. But to just stray into this as he has, utterly absurd. Lancel has lost his way. He needs to be dissuaded, not encouraged, before he completely loses his mind, if he has not already. I'm reporting it to the Enclave Council in the morning. He is on the council, friend, the woman reasoned, softly yet also anxiously, so eager to change his mind. Then you need not fear me telling them then, Renya, and I am simply overreacting. But you should come with me. It's not right. This is the last place you should be in your condition. Renya laughed. Condition? I'm pregnant, dear Kedrid. I'm not ill. I'm not about to abandon these robes just yet. Very well, Kedrid replied. Without a further word, he turned and went on his way, as quickly as a walk could take him. You will regret this, old friend, she called to his departure. I would rather regret missing an opportunity than making a mistake that will haunt me for the rest of my life, old friend. The woman remained stood for a few moments before she herself seemed to shrink in posture and reluctantly turned about to leave. Still shaken from the turn of events, Aurelil remained silent for a moment. She somehow felt cradled by the cover of her late mother's grave, and so there she remained until she was certain both had gone. She turned their attention once more to her mother. Abandon these robes? There's weirdlings afoot this night, Mum. I hope they're not disturbing you. She smiled awkwardly again. No more so than myself, anyhow. The world's going mad. Has it always been like this? Nobody cares about anyone these days, like, really cares. It's like a cesspit on the street, and we keep getting these weirdlings from the Enclave trudging around here. I don't know if it's because I'm nearly a woman and I'm realising it all for the first time, or because things are changing. Is it just me, Mum? Am I what's changing? By the prisoner, I better not be the weirdling in all this. Thunder groaned from the sky, distantly maybe, but no less catching her by surprise. She was, however, anything but afraid now near her mother. God, listen to that, Mum. I'll not have a silly town bell telling me when to go to bed, but you know what? That thunder there might just do the trick. She pouted and opened her arms so that her dark cloak drooped down her, giving her wings for all but a moment, in despite trying to contain her warm failure. That was now a lost cause. Aurelil then knelt and slowly placed her arms around the cold, soaked stone and rested her cheek upon it, rubbing into it. Want me to talk more, Mum? Honest, I'm really scared for Dad, but we'll just have to sort that one out tomorrow when we're in the tavern. She hugged the gravestone tighter, feeling an overwhelming urge to stay. I think I'm just lost, Mum. Lost without you more and more with each passing day, and it shows. It shows. There came a crease in her voice, and she snivelled as tears once more made a break down her cheek, before rain swept down and consumed them once more. Promise me everything will be all right, Mum. Please. A sign. Anything will do, okay? I'll keep my eyes peeled. Just a sign. Anywhere. Anytime. And there she remained for a few seconds more, wrapped around her mother's gravestone, her eyes shut as tightly as her hold on her mother's grave. For a time. It was a deeply loving embrace that may very well have lasted longer, but her eyes slowly opened as she felt something. A sign, she dared hope. It came again, along her leg, upon which she was rested, a surge of sorts. She slowly recoiled from the stone. Her heart was already thudding in full flight. Her last breath was now seconds ago. A third surge from the earth raised her slightly upwards. Startled, amazed, awestruck, and above all, terrified, the girl fell back. Her eyes widened in horror as the mud of the thick soil of her mother's grave, so close before her, began to swell. Her eyes were wide open, her eyes tuned to the sound of the churning mud, and even amidst the rain. Mother, she breathed, unaware she had even uttered the word, but then a new development fell her heart. Her mother's was not the only disturbed grave. Both to her left and right, soil on the graves swelled and surged. She turned about to see the others elsewhere doing the same. Too terrified to even move, crookedly and hesitantly she rose to her feet. The graves surrounding her all churned. The resting dead were risen anew. She had heard of such things, but by so many people. Few had seen such things, though, and that fact did a lot less than comfort her a little. But her fear grew to new lengths when she gazed down there below the hill. Standing there, frozen, a bolt of lightning offered a glimpse of her plight. Throughout the entire graveyard, the risen had claimed all shadows. They were stick-thin, soulless ones, staggering about, draped in tattered, rotted cloth without a clear cause or direction. At the sight of this, she screamed in that flash of lightning. She turned to look in another area below, the screamed shrilly again. Come the second strike from the sky. A third flash released yet another piercing scream, and from her, as though she was the voice of lightning itself. Not even daring to cast the motioning grave of her mother a cursory glance, Aurelio turned and finally found the stomach to bolt down the hill as fast as she could. Weeping and panting with each step, she raced down the steps when she strayed onto a grave. Her foot kicked something hard. She dreaded to think what, but she was sent diving forward off the hill. First she landed hard on the thorn bushes and then rolled over a dozen times, stopping only when her head struck another tombstone. Her screams were silenced then, and all went dark. I'm going to have a cigarette and a little sip of a Coca-Cola, and then I'll do chapter 1. Thank you. Don't know how to stop live streams. There we go. Got it. Goodbye.